the situation in the West Asia. You know that I'm right now in Iran, in Tehran, and we know that dozens of American fighter jets are in Jordan, and they're
Mhm.
building up their military power in the region. And one of the U.S. aircraft carriers is close to, to get here, to be in the West Asia, in the region. When you look at, what has happened in the last 2 weeks, there was a huge propaganda machine. There was everything, Alex. To be in Iran and see what has happened in the last 2 weeks and how they have done each and every tricks, from, coming from the Maidan in Ukraine, going to Georgia, all the tricks were playing here in Iran in order to destabilize the whole country. And it's all of these, chaos started with a protest, with some protests in Iran because of the economy. The government was, and somehow the currency was suffering, reducing its value. The the exchange rate toward dollar was somehow collapsing. That's why the people have decided to go out and protest, and to somehow communicate with the government because of the difficulties they were feeling, they were facing. And here is what Scott Bessent said about the role of the United States in what has happened in Iran.
Want to say about sanctions, something else you've been working on, of course. What are you planning there in terms of Iran and the impact there? Do sanctions actually work? And the same question with regard to 500% secondary sanctions or tariffs on countries who purchase energy products from Russia.
Okay, so two things there. There are treasury sanctions. And if you look at a speech that I gave at the Economic Club of New York last March, I said that I believe the Iranian currency was on the verge of collapse, that if I were an Iranian citizen, I would take my money out. President Trump ordered Treasury and our OFAC division, Office of Foreign Asset Control, to put maximum pressure on Iran, and it's worked. Because in December, their economy collapsed. We saw a major bank go under. The central bank has started to print money. There is a dollar shortage. They are not able to get imports. And this is why the people took to the street. So this is economic statecraft. No shots fired. And things are moving.
Yeah. Alex, do you understand what is going on in the mind of the Trump administration when it comes to the West Asia and Iran?
No, I don't. I think that there are two factions there. And I think that one faction desperately wants to regime change Iran. And that faction, whether they know it or not, are in lockstep with, the global world rule-based order, and the Davos people in the city of London and Wall Street and so forth. It's very clear, their geopolitical imperative is to dominate Eurasia, the whole Eurasian continent. Iran is the pivotal point of West Asia. So Iran is where the new international north-south transport corridor traverses. So it's an extremely important trade route. It's a very rich country in terms of natural resources. It's a very powerful country in terms of military strength. It is. It has some of the most educated population in the world. Produces one of the top countries in how much engineering and technical talent it produces every year, and so on and so forth. So, as far as the globalists are concerned, they want to take control of Iran because it's too important for their agenda. Uh, and I think that for a lot of people in the U.S. administration, this is almost like a knee-jerk thing. We need to dominate the Middle East, and so the mullahs have to go. and then they don't question it beyond that. They just think that that's a good thing because the mullahs are reactionary and freedom and democracy and blah blah blah, human rights, right? They don't think beyond that. Uh, as far as Wall Street and City of London are concerned, the incentive is obvious. It's a very resource rich country, and if you control the government, if you have political control in the country, then you get the resource wealth of the country, which, by magic of our fraudulent monetary system, immediately become assets on the balance sheet of Western banks. So that's where that pressure is coming from. Then you have Israel, which is part of that equation because Israel was created by the British Empire exactly for this reason, so that they could have a beachhead in the region, which they can use to hold the whole region under control. So if any country becomes independent and it deigns to say no to the empire, there you have Israel, which is eager to go to war against anybody at a drop of a hat. So Israel is serving its purpose. Meanwhile, somehow in the United States, they made Israel this sacred cow, which cannot be questioned, and which is supported out of some kind of a biblical mm, biblical philosophies and interpretations, out of some deep sentimental attachment to the home state for the Jewish people, and on and on. So this whole aura was created around Israel is something that you just cannot touch it. You just, whatever Israel does, right or wrong, we have to support Israel. So there's a lot of people who still believe that. But then there are people in the US government, which I think Trump himself is one of them, who are changing course radically and who are dismantling the world global rules based order and who understand how things are, meaning Israel is not an ally of the United States. The interests of the state of Israel are contrary to the interests of the United States. And by taking down the Iranian regime, they will actually help the globalist forces who are their enemies. So there are opposing forces in the US administration. And that's why it's always wrong to regard the United States or any other country as a monolith and to say Americans are doing this and Americans are doing that. Uh, last week I spoke with we didn't speak last week, Nima, but I was with Professor Glenn Deason and we were discussing this. And this was at the moment when people were saying, oh, in the next 12 to 24 hours, 100% the United States is going to go to war. They're going to try to regime change Iran. They're going to bomb. And I said in Glenn Deason podcast, he is not going to bomb Iran. Trump will not bomb Iran. Or if he does, it's going to be another half-hour fake war, like last June. Just a bombing rate that literally took less than half hour, right? And so it turns out I was right. And now we have to appreciate, then people say like, oh yes, that's because the Starlink went down. The Iranians figured out how to take down Starlink. Okay, fine. And then the Saudis didn't allow the United States to overfly, and the Iraqis didn't either. And like many reasons that they say like Trump lost the nerve. He got scared in the last moment and so forth. But we have to recognize this is 3 out of 3. 3 out of 3, because the first time that pressure was brought to bear on Trump to go to war against Iran was in 2019, in June of 2019. Then the second time was last summer when Trump bombed Iran, but it was a total of about 40 missiles, Tomahawks and these bunker busting bombs. And it lasted half hour, less than half hour. And this was the third time. And all 3 times he either didn't go to war or he, conducted like a fake. It wasn't fake, but if you compare last June's raid on Iran with Libya or Syria or Afghanistan, Fallujah, you know, the real wars, the difference is very obvious. This was not a real war, and then the Iranians responded in kind. They didn't wipe out U.S. bases across the Middle East. They just struck one, pre-announced it, no casualties. Trump thanks them and so forth. And so I don't know what's going to happen. It is very obvious that pressure is being put again on Trump to go to war against Iran, to regime change it, because the world global order, the rules based global order, is desperate to derail the BRICS, to destroy the North South transport corridor, to gain control of the Middle East, of the West Asia. And Iran is now a major part of the BRICS, major part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It has comprehensive treaties with China, with Russia. So it's an important anchor of regional security for the Eurasian landmass. This is why it's so important to destroy Iran, or at least bring it back into Western orbit by, democratically imposing, a Shah on the Iranian people. But I don't think that Trump is on board on that with that project. I really genuinely don't think that he himself is. That's not to say that there are many people in the structure of American government who are on board with that project. And we also, in 2019, we learned who was pressuring Trump to launch a war against Iran, and that was the British embassy in Washington. So what happened is, in June of 2019, the Iranians downed a drone, an American drone, in the Persian Gulf. And so now all of a sudden everybody started getting hysterical. You have to respond. You have to go and bomb the Iranians. And Trump said no. And then after Trump said no, the British ambassador in Washington, Sir Kim Darroch, fired off a series of cables to the Foreign Office in London, venting his frustration. And he called Trump names, and he said he was inept and not serious, and that he was chaotic and unreliable. But the important part of those cables that were leaked out by Anonymous was that Kim Darroch was saying that Trump can be influenced, and that we have to surround him with quote unquote Trump whisperers and flood the zone so that he signs off on, okay, let's bomb Iran. And I think that this is exactly how they got him to sign off on the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. And that was, you had John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and all these characters. And then in those cables between, then they revealed other names of people who were very on board with the British agenda of taking down the Iranian regime. So you see, it was the British in 2019. Now this year, those who are out in the front are the Israelis. But remember what we said, Israel has always been a British imperial project, serving exactly that purpose, controlling the oil-rich region. And well, I've done quite a bit of research lately about, because I'm trying to understand where Trump administration stands on the issue of Great Britain. Are they aware? Are they aware of the role? And of course, I suspect that they are aware, because if I can figure it out, they can figure it out. But the more I looked into it, the more reassured I came. Not only are they aware, but we are observing an actual war. brewing up between the United States and Great Britain. And this war is not, it's not bombing raids, but the Trump administration is increasingly piling pressure on the British, kicking them out of important flashpoints in the world, the Balkans, Syria, some other places, and breaking up their alliances little by little, one by one. And mark my words, at some point there's going to be some kind of a break, and I think it's going to be over terror financing. Because since Trump entered the White House, there's an investigation going on. It's not discussed in public, but British media have written about this. And the investigation is looking into the problem of the grooming gangs. Okay? This is an affair that seems like a British internal affair that kind of flared up some 10 years ago, and then died down, and it looks like they kind of shoved it into the memory hole until Trump comes to the White House. And then suddenly it flares back up again. And the person who is leading the charge on this is Elon Musk. And there's a well-founded suspicion that these activities of these grooming gangs in the UK were related to terror financing. That at least some of the money that they were managing to skim off illegally in the United Kingdom, not just from as grooming gangs, but also they were into all kinds of frauds, like VAT fraud, insurance fraud, setting up fake companies, laundering money. And there's evidence that at least some of that money ended up funding Osama bin Laden while he was already in Pakistan, in Abbottabad. So the money was traced to him in Abbottabad. So in the United States, there were reports that surfaced earlier this year, last year, and the Times of London wrote about this, that the US administration wants to get to the bottom of whether this was done in collusion with the British government or whether this was just, inadvertent oversight. And so if and when this comes out, and it seems that the point person in all this is exactly Keir Starmer, which is why Keir Starmer has been so hysterical to try to shut down X, to try to somehow get rid of Elon Musk, and why they have been so they've implemented this incredible draconian system of censorship and putting more than 12,000 people away for social media posts. It's because they're very, very scared, and they want to shut this down before the British public becomes aware of everything that's going on. And another person who is very central to this is Gordon Brown. So Keir Starmer, Gordon Brown, very likely also Tony Blair. So this is a direct conflict. We go back to Iran. Why would Trump then help Israel and Great Britain to get rid of Iranian regime today? It doesn't really make sense. And I remember that after the polite 30-minute war of June 25, that Trump explicitly said that he's not interested in effecting a regime change in Iran. And I believe that still stands, and that to some extent, the very top of the Iranian government, that they understand this and that they have extensive communications, if not directly with Trump and his government, then indirectly through through the Kremlin.
Yeah, Alex, the whole ideology of Europeans is, they're all globalists. We know that, and the main agenda on their part is, you know, to facilitate that sort of ideology. But even Macron, his private message coming out saying that we are all in with the case of Iran, telling Donald Trump, but let's ignore the case of Greenland. What is, do you think what Donald Trump is doing to Greenland is somehow a threat to their globalist ideology, or what is the outcome of the United States movement or the United States policy in Greenland? On one hand, you can say that the United States is somehow grabbing a land that is not belonging to the United States. They want to be more powerful, more capable in terms of confronting China and Russia, maybe the whole East. On the other hand, you see somehow their partners, their allies, like Canada, coming out and saying rules-based international order is somehow over. These are huge statements after all, because this is not a globalist agenda. When you say rules-based international, it's a hardcore of the globalist rules-based international order. How do you see? It seems to me that Europeans, together even with Canada, they're somehow in a desperate situation. They don't know how to deal with the United States under the Trump administration on one hand. On the other hand, they want to have a better relationship, a better partnership with the United States, which it seems that Donald Trump is not interested in.
Yeah, well, this is exactly it, Nima. The Trump administration is very clearly and definitely dismantling the post World War II global order, which was the foundation of their whole agenda to rule the world in the future. To impose a one world global order on everybody. And this is where even the Ukraine war was part of this, because the war in Ukraine was meant to dismantle Russia. So they were going to regime change Russia, and then if they got some, Juan Guaido, some new Boris Yeltsin into the Kremlin, then they would 100% use Russia to subjugate China, and then they rule the Eurasian landmass, and then they're in charge. But Trump obviously is not interested in that, and he began to extricate the United States from the Ukraine war. And the really, really important part in that is the security guarantee. Because if you remember, when Trump came into the White House, they said the pressure that started to build up, and there was a lot of everybody flying back and forth into Washington, out of Washington, and so forth. They were trying to maneuver Trump into issuing a security guarantee to Ukraine. Now, what that means is that at that point, the British, the French, the Germans, they could maybe send some troops on the ground in Ukraine. And then, if those troops came under attack by the Russians, as the Russians said they would do, then the Europeans would say, like, aha, now you have to make do on your guarantee. Now you have to come and bail us out. And there you have then American troops on the ground in Ukraine. So that was the objective of all that. And Trump said, no, I'm not doing that. You can buy weapons from me, you can do whatever you want, but we're not giving the security guarantee. And that was it. And that now jeopardizes their whole thing, because if they can't take down Russia, they can't take down China. And they're losing hegemony of the how do you call it, of the Eurasian landmass, and without that they're nothing. And then okay, I don't know if you can hear me, Nima, because I just lost your picture. It says you're offline. All right, then I'll continue talking because there you are, Nima. Can you? continue talking because I see that there are people that are in the podcast. Uh, okay, and then the other things that I was seeing is that the way the Russians, Hainima, Hainima, I just continued talking because you fell out, but I see that
Yeah,
other people are still in.
yeah,
So basically, the other part of the story is the way I see the Russians and the Chinese going about this. So when Trump abducted Maduro out of Venezuela, uh, they issued a token condemnation, but not a very strong one, not a very passionate one, and they didn't distance themselves from the Trump administration. To the contrary, even now with the Davos uh, forum going on, the WEF forum going on, we see that there is definitely some kind of a partnership between the Trump administration and the Kremlin, and you see that you know Putin is almost trolling the globalists together with Trump because I swear I thought this was AI, but it looks like it's real, where Vladimir Putin goes into this whole you know laundry list of items and real estate prices for suggesting how much United States should pay for Greenland. And I thought that is so bizarre because it would, like Putin comes out with something like $158 million that the Americans should pay for Greenland, which means that they have nothing against it. They're completely they're not condemning the United States. They're not rejecting. They're not saying, well, if you try to take Greenland, then we're going to come and oppose you. No, which means, and we knew a little something about this, that when they met in Alaska, we know that part of what they were discussing was the Arctic strategy, and that the Russian offer was let's develop the Arctic together, the United States, Russia, and China. And then the Arctic is another alternative um, trade route, which is going to be open year round, which is cheaper and faster than the Suez. And Suez is where you have all the British Empire choke points that, their whole control of global trade was based on controlling the choke points. And so if you trade it to Suez between, because between the Pacific, you have the Malacca Strait where they can choke off the trade. You have Gates of Hormuz, Bab el Mandeb. You have the Suez, the Red Sea. You have the Gibraltar, and then to get to Europe, you had to pass through all these choke points that if they control it, then they control the world's trade. But now there's Iran with no north-south international trade route, and then you have the Arctic. So the United States comes in as a strategic partner in developing the Arctic together with the Russians. And the Russians are not going hysterical. They're saying like, cool, if they pay 158 or so million to the Danes, that should be all great, and we can get on with the business. So this is all very, very amazing to observe. But we have to be careful how we read the Trump administration because it's not a monolith. There's some people who are pulling in the direction of multipolar integrations, and then there are other people who are still loyal to the globalist system, to NATO, to European allies. Whether this is understanding what they're doing or whether this is just entrenched groupthink that they just haven't rethought, I don't know. But the danger is, Trump might not be there next year. Trump might not be there tomorrow. Trump is now running the place with executive orders. If the Senate and the House of Representatives aren't in his camp, then all of this can be very quickly undone by the next administration if they lose the elections in 3 years. So it's all very, very fragile. And so this is, I think, why Trump is desperate for big wins, you know. Uh, but for the time being, at least, it's clear that he has at least tacit support from the Russians and from the Chinese. So to me personally, that's an encouragement because they know more about what Trump is doing than we do.